This week's episode is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Use promo code WrestlingFuture for 20% off your purchase. Manscaped.com and the Lawnmower 3.0. Your balls will thank
you. Welcome to a very special episode of Wrestling with the Future. Tonight, Dan the Man, we are going to explore the future of pro wrestling. Sir. How appropriate that we are wrestling with the future of pro wrestling. We have a special guest with us tonight, and I will, of course, give you the standard introduction. But let me just bring our friend in. This is a gentleman well known, regarded as the single most talked about Hulk Hogan lookalike impersonator. Ray, do you consider yourself an impersonator or impressionist?
What is neither, it? Man. I am Randy Hogan. I am 3 years older than that guy that calls himself Hulk, okay? Which means I'm the older. I was here first. So the other guy should be referred to as a Randy Hogan impersonator.
There you go.
I just want to get that straight.
I love it.
And hello, all my friends, fans, and foes.
The innovator, Randy Hogan. Randy, you are looking fine tonight. By the way, that's a really cool shirt you're wearing. Show everybody that shirt.
Yeah, and that is a really cool shirt you're wearing.
Yeah. Look at that. Matching shirt.
Only special Random Maniac. Now, there's not a lot of those going around.
Oh, man, I'll tell you what. It's a very cool shirt. And it goes with everything. Can't beat the yellow and red. Dan the Man.
Yes,
my
sir.
Dear friend, welcome back to another episode. This is our second this week. Let's just fill everybody in. We had an amazing show. Randy, I don't know if you saw it, but Tuesday night we did a really interesting show with a magician, world famous illusionist Bobby Borgia, and Bobby joined us from his club, his. What Dan? He called it the Comedy and Magic Club.
Yeah, the Keller Comedy and Magic Club.
Keller Comedy and Magic, Conjuring and Cocktails.
Conjuring and Cocktails.
Sweet. Dinner and Deception. I love it. We got a lot of response, Dan, from that show. By the way,
I bet.
Yeah, a lot. And I think. By the way, Bobby's coming back. We're going to do a part 2 with Bobby, and I think we're going to actually expand on that. That subject. I'd like to say we're going to expound on it. We're going to actually do a roundtable on magic.
Nice.
And so we're going to do a refs roundtable on magic. So, and I thought it would be interesting to get maybe 2 or 3 other magicians locally here in the South Jersey area, in Philadelphia area. Because we got some pretty remarkable comedy clubs around here. And I'm going to have them come on and talk about their art and craft, So, and I, of course, love to have you on the show if you want to do it with me.
Yeah, I know a thing or two about that stuff.
Yeah, I know. So, listen, Randy, welcome back. This is your return engagement with us.
It's my pleasure to be back home, brother.
I'm telling you what, we love you here. And as I started off the show, telling everyone we were supposed to have Dave LaGreca from Busted Open Radio. Mm-hmm. Dave is tending to his wife tonight, who is under the weather. So we wish her well, speedy recovery. And our friend Doc Diamond, who was also going to join us tonight in this discussion, is also under the weather, as they had to take his little hiney to the hospital tonight to get him up and feeling better again. So we wish Doc a speedy recovery as well. So we're just going to go live tonight, call it in the ring, and what happens, happens. So let's just kind of talk about the subject at hand. I wanted to throw this out to you guys, and whoever wants to jump in there first. But Randy, you got to be fast because Dan is really, really quick.
I know he's smart too. I'm old and under recovery.
There you go. Yeah. And we should tell people Randy is You got a bum heel right now, but you're doing well.
I had September 2nd a full ankle replacement.
Yeah.
And those that don't know what that is, basically it's like a knee replacement where they cut out the bad part and they stick in a titanium part and they hammer it into your bones, and you take 5 or 6 months until it grows in, and then you have you pretty much normal activity, as opposed to the old school way. They only used to fuse it, and then your ankle is stiff and you got a gimp and a limp, and I won't be able to do any more top rope jumps or nothing,
Yeah, I know. What a shame.
I know. So that's it. But anyways, everything is going well and everything else, and I plan on probably the first of the year I'll be walking semi-normal and ready for those conventions and things when they pick up.
Yeah, I know you got some stuff. Well, thankfully starting to open up a bit, so I saw you have some stuff coming up. Good for you. Still here in New Jersey, nothing's quite open yet, so we're still, betwixt and between, wrestling anyway. But tonight we're going to talk about the future of pro wrestling. It looks to me, and I'll just toss this out there, it looks to me like the once promising future of pro wrestling is being thwarted and dashed on an almost daily basis, largely from the business itself. It appears to me that there's this death by apathy. People don't seem to care. Dan, you want to pick up on that and tell me your thoughts?
Yeah, you nailed it. The fact is the casual fan is gone, and the only people that are currently watching the product on a regular basis are the diehard core group. I mean, you could have somebody come out and wrestle a broom for 2 hours, and those people would still watch that show. Whereas the casual goer, the older, and I mean this as a respectful way, since this kind of comes from your clique, is the older crowd, the territory, every week going to the Cow Palace, every week going to the center in Memphis. Those people that were right now probably in their mid to late 60s, they don't care. They're gone too. At some point, early 2000s, wrestling decided that it was no longer mainstream and it was going to target the specific audience it wanted, and that's the only audience that's left.
Randy, you and I are in that category that Dan just talked about, and when he
even over it.
Yeah, exactly. So we would certainly qualify as that casual audience. I know I'm gone. There's nothing really keeping me in front of my television to watch, wrestling. What is there? I don't know if you watch it because you have to or because you want to, or there's something there you enjoy. But I'll be honest with you, on my end, I can honestly tell you, I'm having a real tough time, like even keeping up with it, because I can't sit long enough to watch it. I really can't.
I'm the same way. We've talked about this before. I think it all started back when the internet just blew up, and all of a sudden there's no more kayfabe. Everybody knows what's happening. Everybody's got spoilers of who's going to beat who and the title and everything else that dropped. Yeah. You didn't have any Bruno Sammartinos or even Ric Flairs anymore that held the title and would go on week after week, whether it be different territories around the country, around the world. Now you've got so many different factions because the business has changed so much. Oh, I think back as far as if you were an old fan, I think you will always be some type of a fan. Old, I'm talking about our generation, as Dan said.
Yeah.
I was a fan long before I was a wrestler, as a lot of us were.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Randy, too.
Yeah, back in the days when you had the Crusher and the Original Sheik and Dick the Bruiser and Bobo Brazil and guys like that, and there were stories to follow and the regionals. Well, now that it's so condensed and it's all over the internet, the different television channels and everything else, WWE and its conglomerates still have a hold on the business. Yeah. I was watching it last night. And I try so hard to get either an interest or emotionally involved in AEW or NXT. In my mind, NXT is still and always will be a farm club, a farm team for WWE, which is true.
Exactly.
They go, they win the title,
Exactly.
they drop the title. The next night they show up on SmackDown or something. I look at
That's a real good point, Randy. Real good point.
And I look at the women.
I don't want that point to be lost, and I'm not gonna interrupt you, but I just Dan remind. You know what, Dan? Just remind me, because I want to pick up on Randy's point. Go ahead, Randy. I'm sorry. Good.
No, that's it. We were looking at my wife and I both watching it last night, and we flipped between AEW and NXT, both on the same time. So we flipped channels, during commercials, whatever else, just waiting to be involved, waiting to be invested in something. Just give me something or someone. I like The Fiend for some reason, because he's got that character. There are no characters anymore. I like the character. But I look at the women in both of them, and you got some of the crazy here and that, but they're all cookie cutter. They all wrestle the same.
You know what?
They all
and Dan and I were talking about that. It's funny because we just mentioned that on a previous show. Characters. We were talking about characters. There are no characters anymore.
Nope.
Right.
And one of the things that you picked up on is this, and Dan knows it's one of my favorite things, emotional investment. I talk a lot about emotional investment and the psychology of wrestling. There is a need, a life-saving need for both of these things. It's the essence, it's the blood of wrestling. The emotional investment, having someone go, "Oh, what's going to happen now?" Like that kind of thing. In fact, to equate it to a show that Dan and I just did on Magic, there's a very direct correlation between Magic and pro wrestling. It's an illusion.
Always has been. Yes.
Yeah, and Dan and I talked about this with Bobby Borgia the other night. People used to go ooh and ah, and now it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah.
You went from ooh and ah to eh.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I wanted to do tonight, I wanted to have Randy and myself and Doc Diamond, because we are, let's just be honest, Randy, we're the proverbial old farts here.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to have, because Dan is, is a young whippersnapper here, and
young punk.
After all, he is the smartest guy in the room, so we let him believe. And I wanted to have that juxtaposition of ideas and thoughts, because maybe we can learn something from the younger generation, but it appears to me, Dan, that we're really not. We're not learning anything from, how do I want to say, the young bucks. What are they teaching us? What are the young bucks teaching us?
Randy hit on it.
Already know.
Randy hit on it perfectly when he said it's all the same match. If you look at the product on NXT right now, that's all Performance Center graduates. Everyone there went through the same training, same instructors, same promo class, entrance class. You literally have 30, 40 people. Now, granted, some of them came from elsewhere and they can break that mold, but probably 80% of your roster is literally interchangeable. Skill set, mic set, talent.
Yes.
There's literally no originality because it's taught out of it. What's that?
Dan, are they making a mistake teaching them all the same drill?
Well,
teaching them all, are they, and I want both of you guys to jump in on that. You pointed out the Performance Center.
Okay.
There's a set regimen. It's a curriculum. Let's just be honest about it.
It is. It's
Randy
school.
said it. It's a school. It's like any school. It has a curriculum. It has a guideline by which they follow. And it has a regimented series of routines that get you from beginning class to graduation. But they're doing this with every class that enters.
Well, and the thing is they're doing it with people that aren't. I mean, if you're green, fresh off the street, WCW had the power plant, literally people off the road. That's fine. But you're bringing in talent from Japan and Mexico and indie guys who Ring of Honor who built up their.
Dan, and I'm glad you put, and I want you and Randy to pick on, because this is something that people forget about. This is something to forget about. The talent at the Performance Center are all working indie wrestlers. That's where they got them from.
Right.
Largely, they came from the indies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they're taking guys that have already spent 10, 12 years in the business, worked, earned a living, and now they're trying to reteach them something. Randy, is there a problem inherently with that thought?
Absolutely. It takes away the individuality that probably attracted the Fed to these indie guys in the first place. They're selling tickets because they got a goofy gimmick, or they're doing this or that, and then all of a sudden they get in school, as we call it, and that gimmick's taken away. You previously hit on the psychology as well as the investment. Well, I think the psychology starts with the WWE, and that psychology is not able to get your typical fan invested anymore. So I think it's their psychology is the problem. It's their thinking. It's not take a talent who has a skill and is somewhat successful on the indie circuit and bring that skill and improve upon it, twist it a little bit their way, but let the guy be what made him popular in the first place. You get a guy that's popular with a gimmick or something else, and you totally change him, and he goes through the NXT thing for however the reason. He all of a sudden now is on SmackDown or something, and he's like a Curtis Axel or somebody. He just gets buried. He's got talent, he's got pedigree, but he's buried because they got nothing for him, because they don't have the psychology to put that into a guy who's got something to get the fans invested.
Well,
it pisses me off thinking about it.
The key there too, when you lose that luster between NXT and Raw and SmackDown, is because Raw and SmackDown are still at the beck and call of Vince McMahon, and he has nothing to do with NXT. So they bring up this.
That's a great point. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you.
They bring up this talent, and they're immediately repackaged. They're told to wrestle a different style. They're told you can't say that in a promo. Don't use that move. And everything that was left of their luster from NXT is gone. I mean, have. You look at just the list you mentioned, Axel, the Ascension, half the female talent that comes up. Yeah, some of they're literally buried. And I mean that literally. Sometimes they're on TV a week or two, Raw and SmackDown, and they start losing. Or all of a sudden, hey, you went from a dominant heel to now your gimmick is an opera singer. Like, okay, why?
Yeah, and they change gimmicks so often too. Guys like Heath Slater, how many things did he go through?
Oh my God!
Still ended up getting put, and he's talented. He talks good.
Dan and I talked about.
Ziggler's another one. He does all he's told. He goes any gimmick he wants. He's super talented, but he's buried.
What? And you know what? And I'm going to say something, Randy, and I'm going to get some heat for this, but Dolph did that to himself. And I'm going to tell you how, and I'm going to tell you why. Two things happened. Number one, he took the money. That's number one. They offered him a boatload of money, and he said, yep, thank you. That's number one. That killed him there. Number two, he continued to say yes when he should have said no.
Oh, you are so right.
One guy, and I'm going to throw this name out because there's a very good chance, a better than good chance that he may be a guest on the show in the upcoming weeks. Enzo Amore. All right. When Enzo and Cass came along, I thought to myself, maybe there's hope, because those guys were different. They looked different. They sounded different. And Enzo was a guy at a straight shoot. Enzo was a guy that was going to say what he wanted, do what he wanted, and they gave the Fed, Dan, the big FU and finger.
Yep.
You know? And he made a ton of money for them doing it. And they finally realized what he was doing. Instead of going with it, they shit canned him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like a CM Punk type of thing.
Jump in on that. Talk to me.
Yeah, no, you're right, because that they're a good example, and it's also kind of Enzo's a great example of the bullshit that comes from the company. You know, when he was terminated, the official reason was the accusations against him, the sexual assault accusations, that he didn't tell the company they were coming. Now he didn't, because they had evidence that it was complete crap. The girl had sent him a text saying, "I'm going to lie about this to get money." You know,
and
so
prove
he didn't.
It was bullshit.
Right, exactly. He was able to prove it was bullshit instantly, and there's people on the roster now that have been that they've looked the other way for way worse than a bad accusation.
Sure.
And so they were looking for an excuse to dump him, and I think they kind of moved from one thing to another, and you heard some stories backstage, but he was such a unique talent, and you saw the reaction, you heard the reaction he got. And they had the audacity to tell him he wasn't over. It was his chant and his catchphrases. Like, anybody could have come out to the ring and said that, and it would have been just as popular, which is bullshit. You know,
yes,
absolutely, it's bullshit. Randy,
exactly.
The voice of experience. Randy, talk to me. What did they do right? What did they do wrong?
Are we speaking about Enzo? Or are we just talking in general?
Enzo and Cass. What did they do right? What did they do wrong?
Well, what they did right is not put them against each other. It seems like every tag team is very predictable. 5 or 6 months down the road, somebody turns on somebody like Tucker and Otis. They split up, they have a fight, and then they both disappear. That's what happens. I thought Cass had a good. I thought he had a good singles future. He was big. He was muscled up. He was good looking. He could heel or face either one. Enzo had that kind of cocky, goofy gimmick, which was good. That could have carried him along if they would have worked with it. Just like, this Fiend thing is going to die out. Where's it going to be a year from now?
Yeah.
He's not going to be an Undertaker, but for now, it's great.
Yeah.
So they should be planning on what's the next step for him. They should have done that with Enzo also, okay?
I'll tell you what the next step is. Nothing.
They've got
nothing in the wings. That's the problem.
And they're all look at how many good guys they've lost.
100%, Randy. I agree with you. The thing that they did right is they kept them together and not against each other. That's what they did right. But Cass had a look. He was the guy for a 7-foot dude, could move. He was agile. A good-looking guy. Jack, all muscled up and stuff. He was a good-looking dude, right?
And another one.
And now they not only killed his career, he has no career because he hasn't wrestled since he left.
Right.
I think he may have done, and Dan, you probably know better than I. He may have done a handful of indie shows.
He did
after he left.
Yeah, because when he left, some pictures circulated of him kind of out of shape. He had gotten a belly, and he kind of worked his way back and forth. Same thing with Enzo. He was popping up on the indie scene in some side projects, but neither of them really are big in any company right now.
Well, the thing that Enzo did, which was smart, was he saved his money, and he opened up a gym. He owns a gym here in New Jersey. I forget the name of it. Oh, Edison Fitness Club in Edison, New Jersey. And he is there every day. He's there every day. And so he parlayed at least his financial success into, a wrestling and boxing gym. But he also has a clothing line, a line of shoes. He's got a record deal. He makes his own music videos. He's got a production company. So he did something right. What he did wrong was, and maybe I don't know in essence whether it was really wrong, but he didn't play ball with the Fed.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're going to say what did he do wrong, that's probably what he did wrong. You know, you could take that attitude a little too far sometimes. You know,
Right.
you know, you could, you know, it's like, you know, and Dan will tell you, you know, being Italian, sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves, you know, right, Daniel?
Bada bing.
You know,
Randy,
we're talking about
rescue me from this kid.
no, you know, it just brings to mind we're talking about Cass and how he probably could have been worked with well. Another old name that came and went was Matt Morgan.
Yeah.
Matt Morgan, you know, is in the next city from me right here, and he's the mayor of the city. He went that way. He's, but again, he was big. He was muscled up.
Yeah.
He could work his butt off, and all of a sudden, something happened. And how many more have there been like that? Guys that either got out of the business all the way, they got out of the business completely because of the way they were treated. They got soured on the business. Is that what the Fed does to guys? I don't know. I guess that's kind of a question.
They wanted him.
You know?
The story with Matt, Randy, if you don't know it, because I do know it. The story with Matt was they wanted to make him this big. We Italians call it a mamaluke. They wanted to make him a big mamaluke, which means like a big dummy, right? And they wanted him to be this just lumbering, dopey guy that got beat all the time. Kind of like it remind you of Lurch from the Addams Family, just a big, like, you know, dopey kind of guy.
That's similar to what they did with Luke when they brought in Luke Gallows, who was huge in Japan, and they give him the Festus gimmick. He's literally a mentally challenged Southerner. Like, you know, the biscuits and gravy, derpy, you know, and it has to have his brother talk for him because he's
that's my point.
Here's literally one of the best big men of the last 20 years, and you made him a retarded mute. Like that's unacceptable.
That's my point. And Randy wants to know what happened. That's what happened.
But
they
you
wanted
mentioned
him to be a big dope.
You mentioned, you know, having to change from NXT to when they moved up to the main roster. And I know that Triple H or whoever now is in charge of NXT.
God forbid.
But doesn't Vince still pull the strings? Doesn't Vince still lay out the outline to what Triple H lays down to the agents and the trainers? Doesn't it still all come from Vince?
You know, it's actually funny. One of the stories that broke this week when they started hyping up the upcoming Survivor Series is NXT's not a part of it because, you know, and they have been in the past. And the story is that Vince made that call as a punishment for NXT losing the ratings wars to AEW.
That's a shoot, brother. That's a shoot.
Wow.
That's a shoot, Randy, for sure. Yep.
Interesting.
That's a shoot, straight up.
But I see both.
Dan's not. He's not BSing you on that. That's real.
I believe you. You never lie to me. I find out where you live.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out how to get me one of them awesome shirts.
Well, man,
it's Randy.
It's easy to do.
Send them $25. He'll send you a shirt.
There you go.
I'll take care of you. But it's just like I said, back to the AEW and NXT. It's hard, and I look at these kids that are starting out, and I totally appreciate the acrobatics they do. Okay, first of all, I don't think either one of their training schools, you know, I guess Dustin Rhodes and Cody are involved in one on that side, you know, as well as over here, but I see a big lack in selling. When somebody gets hit, they're back, or somebody's staggering around the ring, can barely stand up. Next thing you know, they're power slamming the guy and hitting the ropes. I don't understand the lack of selling. One of the basics, whether it's new school or old school.
Let me stop you for a second, Randy. Dan, you're laughing because you know where I'm going with this.
Of course.
What did Karen McDaniel tell us about selling? If you didn't sell, they would make you
They would
sell.
make you sell. Yep.
That
If
is
you
so
didn't
true.
sell for Wahoo McDaniel,
So true. Do you know
Yeah.
how many jobbers, enhancement, Randy type guys through the years I saw really get their ass beat, even in a TV match, because they wouldn't sell? I remember Eddie Gilbert just kicking the crap out of a guy because he missed a couple of spots and sell.
Yeah.
I saw Dr. Death, Steve Williams,
Sure.
wrestling a guy and literally picked him up by the throat in the locker room because he legit forgot a spot, but it screwed up something or other, and Doc was furious. I've seen that.
sure.
So, man, what she said was absolutely true.
Yep.
Yeah, Karen said there was more than one stand. They said if you didn't sell for the boys, they had ways of making you sell, and that meant they would beat the shit out of you.
Wahoo was as tough and as rough and ornery as they came.
Yeah,
but he loved the business. He believed in it, But again, that was a whole different era.
Well, I tell you what, Randy, along those lines, and Dan and I just did interviews with the Eddie Mansfield because you were here, with Eddie and the Scott Casey, and here's two guys that drew shit tons of money on the Southern Circuit, from Southwest to all over the South, and filled arenas to 25,000 people. They made it look believable because they knew each other. It makes a difference when you work with a guy all the time. These kids today, my contention is they don't know how to sell because they don't know each other.
Yeah.
They don't know each other, Randy.
Well, I don't know. I think back to Bobby Eaton. Now, in my estimation, Bobby Eaton was the best seller I've ever seen in the business. For instance, if somebody punches him in the face, he grabs his face. Ouch. If somebody hits you in the face, you're not just going to go back into a rope. You're going to say, that hurts. You hit
throw another name at you. Let me throw another name at you, Randy. And then you and Dan, I'm going to throw it over to Dan. Let me throw another, a baby face seller if there ever was one. Ready for this one? Ricky Morton. Go for it.
Ooh. Yeah, no, you know me. I've he was my favorite, so of course I respect his work, especially, and as much as I loved him, you put him in the ring, and it was, it was obvious who the working talent was on that team. But the thing,
and not only that, Dan, but that Ricky, he would have women crying, like, hysterically crying tears if he was getting beat up.
Right. No, it's funny to think about it, because Randy touched on it perfectly when he talked about selling. How many times have we said on this show, one of the things that hurts the kayfabe and believability of the business is when you watch a match and you see somebody kick out of, a double, like I said, a power bomb through two tables from the second rope, and that's not the finish. Moves like the DDT and the leg drop, or that used to be the finishers nobody kicked out of. You'll see 20 DDTs in one match, including on the apron and the floor, and top rope moves and all this stuff, and you can't sell. Even if you're a good seller, you can't sell a believable match if 5 minutes, 2 minutes into the match, I already know everything I'm seeing is bullshit, because you should be dead.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But you mentioned Ricky Morton. Okay.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings on Ricky Morton. No heat or nothing. Okay. I don't know the man, never met him. I'm just going by through the years watching him in little territories and that.
Mm-hmm.
Ricky Morton, to me, he was quick. He was ahead of his time a little bit. I mean, he was fast. Okay. Robert was a little more laid back in that. Ricky was quick. He was fast. He's like a hamster on crack. He was all over the place. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes his promos.
You're not far off, by the way.
His promos sometimes were so intense that they were unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, and a little bit. I get the same feeling now from Cody Rhodes. Okay, to me, Cody Rhodes is and always will be a mid card talent, upper mid card at best. Okay.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for his connections with Khan, he never would have done what he does. And the same with the Bucks. You know, the Bucks are trying to be the new Rock and Roll Express or the new Rockers or
Never
Fantastics or whatever. Ain't never going to happen. You're right. You got a couple of 80-pound kids, 180-pound kids doing 12 monkey spots, like Dan said. You know,
Yeah.
Everybody's kicking out everything in that. So, but anyway, Ricky was kind of that way. Yes, he worked. Ricky can still go to this very day. Ricky can go. You know, he's got that same personality and everything. But back in the working days, man, he could move. He was ahead of his time. And that, well, but I never could really get invested.
Unrelated side.
Absolutely right. But the difference is now, Randy, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it. The difference is now he has to work. He has to. You understand?
I do.
Okay. The problem is, as I mentioned it earlier, and then you can have it, Dan, because I want to explore this question. What can we learn from the young Bucks? They're never going to be the next Rock and Roll Express. They're never going to be the next Midnight Express. They're never going to be the next anything. They're lucky that they are the current young Bucks, and that's maybe all they're ever going to be relegated to. Where are the next batch of superstars, Dan? You're a young guy. You got your finger on the pulse. You follow this stuff. I'll be honest with you. I don't follow it. I don't follow the business anymore.
Yeah, what you have to look at is, and unrelated side note to the previous conversation, 40 years in the business, and Ricky Morton still has the prettiest mullet in wrestling, period. But
exactly.
You talked about the Young Bucks. What kills me with the Young Bucks, and I mean, stop me if I'm wrong here. You watch them wrestle. They're not wrestling. That's not a match. That's two kids who were self-taught pretending to be wrestlers. You can tell. It's the same thing with Kenny Omega. It's the same thing with some of those guys in AEW. You watch them and they are blatantly obvious. They're amateurs. They're green, but they play like they know everything. And it's not wrestlers. It's two kids in their backyard pretending to be wrestlers. You talked about what we can learn from them. Unfortunately, what you can learn from the Young Bucks is what wrestling can have a ceiling. Nobody not currently watching the product is going to look at a Young Bucks match and go, I need to go watch wrestling right now.
Dan, is it a lesson in what not to do?
Exactly. It's a lesson in overall marketability. You know, people in the 80s flipping through the channels would see the Rock and Roll Express and stop and go, hey, this is pretty nice. You know, same thing with your you know, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Ricky Steamboat, you know, Bruno, but in the earlier times with your Brunos and your Lou Theszes. You know, these were guys that non-fans heard of or watched and went, I'm a wrestling fan now. Nobody that is not a wrestling fan is going to watch a Young Bucks match and become a wrestling fan. That's plain and simple.
And Randy, why? Why is that? Answer that question for Dan. Why? Why were guys like Thez and Bruno and Pedro and Superstar, you know, and Dusty and Harley, why were these guys at that pinnacle?
In my opinion, they were allowed to be themselves.
Thank you.
It was that simple. Dusty Rhodes, nobody taught him how to do a promo, or Flair. You know, I mean, Flair got a pickup from Gorgeous George and all that. But yeah, you know, he took certain things, but it was Flair. Nobody taught these guys nothing. Nobody taught Dick the Bruiser to put a cigar in his mouth and be this big old gruff guy, you know, who was a busted up football player. And it just nobody, because Bobo Brazil, who was big, he was black at the time, which was a rarity also. I remember him and Sailor R. Thomas together. Both
oh my God,
big,
sure.
Good, muscle up. But that started it, okay? It broke that glass ceiling a little bit. They were allowed to be themselves, you know.
Thank you.
These other guys, like you said, Dan, they're all taught the same way, the same cookie cutter. I think it comes from Vince all down, and they come out. The Young Bucks, to me, now another one, which I'll get heat for, I could never get invested in the Hardys. To me,
Oh,
the Young Bucks
please.
are just
Oh.
like the Hardys, okay? They're both backyard guys that somehow, now Jeff tries some kind of a gimmick, but his personal life has totally overshadowed that.
Yeah.
Matt has no charisma on the mic in
None.
any of the gimmicks he tries. Oh, but so I see
And you're
Bucks
absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And Dan, and I'm gonna throw this at you, and you know, it's one of the things that you like to say all the time is that, and I'm glad Randy opened up the segue, that these guys are not allowed to be themselves. But you always say, and it's pointing out the obvious because you are the smartest man in the room, that a great wrestler is himself amped up to 11.
Yep.
Okay? Expound upon that, young squire, and tell everybody why being yourself is an extension in some cases, and in other cases the essence of your character. Bruno, for example,
no, you're
a big, not tall, but he was a big, muscle bound, like Nikita Brezhnikov likes to call him, a gorilla.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. The two things that work there is the believability and the relatability. If you are yourself, it is easy and natural to play yourself. Even the most uncharismatic person goes out there and is themselves, and that promo is believable. That match is believable because I know what I'm watching. If you go out there and you like, let's say WCW told Randy you're going to be a Scottish dancer, it wouldn't, no offense, it wouldn't have worked because that's not you. Same thing with, look at, you talk about Bruno. You look at some of the names of the modern era, like a Steve Austin, who until he became Steve Austin didn't succeed to the level that he could have. You have to have believability, and you have to have that relatability. If I watch you and I know you're real, win, lose, or draw, Dusty Rhodes, Ricky Steamboat, the Rock and Roll Express, these guys are who they are day in, day out. Same thing with the Four Horsemen. I knew that you were getting the real people, and win, lose, or draw, you can relate to that. If I watch it and I see the Young Bucks, I see Kenny Omega wrestling a blow-up doll, or having you see matches where literally one of the opponents is invisible and everyone pretends there's a fourth person in the ring. It's obviously fake. It's obviously stupid, and there's nothing to relate or get to. And that casual fan that. Angelo, you mentioned it a couple shows ago, that 80-year-old woman that's at every Memphis show.
Absolutely.
She's never going to go to a match if at no point can she relate to anything she's seeing.
Well, sure. Randy, that's one of the things we talked about on a previous show. There were fans who became celebrities. Remember John the Hat Guy from ECW.
The sign guy.
Mrs. Kitchener that used to sit front and center at every Madison Square Garden show. This little blue hair old lady in Memphis that had the same seat every week at the Mid-South Coliseum. Dan, talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to throw the phone lines open. So you guys are out there, you want to call in, give a holler. But there were, and the most famous in this area, of course, if you're from the Northeast, is, the ECW hat guy, John the Hat Guy.
Yeah.
Oh, even a guy like Joel Gertner, whose gimmick was that collar, that, broken neck collar that he used to wear at ECW. He started out as a fan. He used to take Paul Heyman home at night, to drive him to New York. That's how they became friends.
WWF had that sign guy, didn't they? He was at every show, every TV taping, in the front, holding up signs.
Yeah, and he looked like Howard Stern.
Yes.
Yeah, he did. He did look like Howard Stern.
We're talking about the personalities and all that. I think the difference also in the older guys was they actually lived the gimmick. If you saw
And you
a bad
don't want
guy in an
Randy.
airport, a little, unfortunately, if a little kid in a wheelchair went up for an autograph, they'd say, "Get away from here, kid." They're living
And
the
we
gimmick,
talked
even though it
about
broke their
that.
heart to do it.
And you know what, Randy? I'm glad you said that because actually, Dan, did I not mention it's exactly
Yeah.
what I said. Chris Jericho used to say, "Get away from me, kid," and then even though it broke his heart when he got home, that he knew that was his character.
Yeah.
But Randy, let me throw a question to you, and I want you and Dan to have this discussion because if I get started on this subject, I'll never shut up. You got guys here in this country who can't make it working, so they go to Japan. They fly themselves to Japan. They make some connections and they get work in Japan. They make a shit ton of money and they become stars over in Japan, like the Young Bucks, like Kenny Omega. I even shudder to say his name. Dan will tell you, I don't like this guy. I don't like him. I just don't ask me why. I just don't like this kid. Do we place too much emphasis, Randy, on the Japanese wrestling product as a step product back here? Or does it have no place in American wrestling?
Well, it's really apples and oranges. If you look at the Mexican style lucha libre, it's totally different than the American style. Yeah. And you look at the Japanese style, okay, which is much faster, much stiffer. They're all different. Not a lot of guys can make the transition. I think the ones that are big in Japan, if they're American guys, then go over, like you said, make it big in Japan and come back here and bring that knowledge and can conform to the American style. Guys like Vader, like Stan Hansen, guys who are huge over there, even Hogan, that can come over here, that can take some of that. That works.
Well, can I interrupt you for just a second? But here's the thing, though. That's a really, really key point. Then I want you to, and I don't want it to be lost. You mentioned Stan Hansen, Hogan, even to some extent Bruiser Brody. Guys like that who spent a lot of time in Japan. They came back here, but they did something, Randy, that was unique. They integrated the U.S. style and the Japanese style. Yes. A guy like Kenny Omega is not integrating the styles. He's wrestling that Japanese strong style here, and it doesn't look right. It looks out of place.
Because you American guys don't know what to do with it.
That's what I was waiting for. Go ahead, Dan.
No, Randy hit it right on the head. You see it in AEW, and it's one of the biggest criticisms they've gotten since they started is these guys can't work. Some of them can't or don't work together because you have Kenny, you have your Kenny Omega doing the Japanese style. You have your Young Bucks doing the amateur, whatever. You've got guys that are green. You've got guys, what we've talked about before, Angelo, the wrestling school, first week in wrestling school, they've got their finisher and won a title. You've got these guys that are a month out of the business being put in the ring.
And that's why I so wanted Doc Diamond to be here tonight. Oh my God. You went right there, Dan. Because I'm good like that, because I'm a psychic like that. Okay.
Part of the problem with I'm with you, Angelo, as far as Kenny Omega. But I think the problem is
I just don't like him.
But the problem is he was big for whatever the reason in Japan. Media grabbed on that. So I didn't know who Kenny Omega was. I'd never seen him until over here. And I'm saying, wow, this guy, is big all over the world. He is really over. I can't wait. And now I look at him and I don't see nothing.
Yeah, I mean, they made this big to-do over it. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. He is a mega star. He walks down the streets of Japan like Elvis. Yeah. I mean, he's like the Elvis of Japan, this guy. But I don't see it. And I thought to myself, what are they... what are they making? This is the guy they call the Omega Man. Like, what am I missing here?
I think
Like,
just like the
I'm not
industry.
seeing it.
No, the thing is, I think all the
I don't know.
associations, Vince and everybody, is so hungry for a major breakout star, another Flair, another Hogan, another somebody, and there's nobody on the horizon doing it. So now
And
here's
it'll
this
never
Omega Man
happen.
from another country going to come over here and going to take the world on fire, and he comes over here and he can't even get his fuse lit. That's the problem.
But here's the problem, and Dan, and you just follow me on this because you and I talked about this. Here's the problem. We did a whole show, Randy, a whole show, I kid you not, on exactly this topic. And here's where we're going. You got a company that is so renowned for wrestling that they overshadow now every individual who works for them. Hulk Hogan was a wrestler. You knew that. It didn't matter who he wrestled for. You knew he was a wrestler. Bruno was a wrestler. The Ultimate Warrior was a wrestler. You knew that. Randy Macho Man Savage.
Mm-hmm.
If you knew that they were wrestlers, you probably knew who they worked for. Because the WWF at the time was synonymous with wrestling. Now it's not even wrestling, it's entertainment. And they're telling you it's entertainment.
Yeah.
Vince McMahon doesn't even like the word wrestling. In fact, and this is a shoot, because you guys don't know, and I'm going to tell you, we are this close, or were this close to seeing every week World Sports Entertainment, WSE. I'm not even kidding you.
Mm-hmm.
It almost became WSE, World Sports Entertainment. That close. And finally, good reason and common sense won out. So at least they're still hanging on by a thread, Dan, but wrestling is still in there.
Well, I think Vince doesn't like the word wrestling because wrestling is a real sport, and he's touting it as being entertainment.
And
you can't be a sport, you can't be entertainment.
It's not
you
even
can be an entertaining sport, but either or, and for financial purposes, the entertainment.
And that's where Dan's going to pick up, because here was the problem, and we talked about this. That company and its leadership do not want any single individual to overshadow the company. The company is the star. You, Randy, you're a perfect example. You are a perfect example. You represent a guy who was the star. Okay?
Sure.
People knew Hulk Hogan. You didn't even have to know his name. You hit face recognition. You knew who he was. He was different looking. You know?
The mustache.
Sunglasses, the bandana, the big white stash, you know? All jacked up and stuff like you are. There you go. You know what's funny, though? Dan, you know what's really funny? Randy looks more like Hulk without the glasses.
Yeah.
It's true.
I've
you
heard
look
that.
more like Terry without the glasses. True. Go ahead,
So
Dan.
they both have fat noses.
Yeah,
see,
but his has been busted a dozen times.
But I'm still prettier.
There you go.
you hit it. I mean, you hit it out of the park with that one, Angelo. The problem is you look at the idea of like sports and entertainment and wrestling. What Vince looked at, and I think a great example for this is the UFC. When the UFC took off, yes, you had Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn, but realistically, the average person buying the UFC pay-per-view was buying the name UFC. They weren't buying the fighter, whereas with boxing, you were buying the pay-per-view to see Mike Tyson, to see Holyfield, to see Sugar Ray Leonard, to see whoever. Yeah. Boxing you sold the star, UFC sold the name. Well, when UFC took over,
interesting. That's a really interesting point. Go ahead.
UFC became the bigger brand. Boxing kind of faded because it lost some of its star power. You didn't have your Mike Tysons and your Holyfields and George Foreman, and you didn't have those names that would bring in. I mean, granted, you a couple, but not across the marquee. Vince saw that, and it's funny. It's a double-bladed sword because on one hand, what Randy said earlier is they're not building any stars for the future. In a way, they don't want to. Like right now, the story broke this week after Randy Orton won the heavyweight title last at the pay-per-view over the weekend. That the main event at WrestleMania is going to be Randy Orton against Edge. You're going to have two guys that are both in their early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. You know, that's your main event at WrestleMania because you don't have anybody under the age of 35 that you can put in that spot. And you don't want to.
He's Dan. Edge has to be 52, 53, easy.
Yeah, I mean,
Randy's got to be 47, 48, right? At least, right? I mean, they're not kids. So to go back to Randy Hogan's point, where are the young breakouts?
Well, that's
if you're promoting guys for WrestleMania that are like 50 years old.
See, and that's the thing is goes to what Randy was talking about earlier with Vince having too much pull, too many strings. Vince loses interest. They bring in a young talent and they want to push them, and they start to build up the character. Brock Lesnar is a great example when he was the youngest champion ever, and they pushed him to the stratosphere. You after Brock Lesnar burned Vince McMahon, he has never pushed a young talent like that ever again. And when they do start to maybe build up around a new character or a younger guy, you talk about The Fiend as a great example, ratings don't immediately go up. That push is pulled. Let's bring The Undertaker back. Let's have Randy Orton against Edge, Ric Flair cameo. He never allows time for the talent to build because he gives up on them too quickly. He's unfortunately, and I know this is going to sound cruel, he's got the attention span of an 80-year-old man. So, he can't focus on a long-term story the way they used to. And you can't build talent up over the course of a week. You can't take somebody like The Fiend, introduce them, build them up, and they lose their first pay-per-view feud because your ratings didn't go up. Well, you never gave the fans a chance to get around anything.
Well, the problem is, and I'm sorry, Rand, but I'm throwing it right back to you. In fact, I'm gonna say something I hope that you'll pick up on. There was a time in wrestling when an angle or a storyline, at minimum, and Randy will tell you, at minimum, a storyline or angle took at least 4 months to develop. It was nothing for an angle or feud to go a year, 2 years. In the case of Bruno and Larry Zbyszko, nearly 3-year program. You have a photo behind you, Ivan Koloff and Bruno. By the way, thank you for putting them next to each other.
Just like you said, move them around for you.
And because these two guys, their program lasted 2.5 years. People don't get that. It wasn't just that Ivan beat Bruno for the title at the Garden, but they continued that storyline in between other storylines. They stretched it out. Randy, go for it.
Well, and that was Bruno, and Bruno was Bruno. Just like in the South here, we had that same long feud between Flair and Dusty Rhodes.
Exactly.
The same thing lasted the same time over and over. But my question was going to be, Dan, at what point do you think that things really changed, I guess, in Vince's mind? At one time, and let's take The Undertaker, there was a gimmick that he believed in. They pushed, and he let him run with it, okay? There's been other ones that have come that I thought were pretty good, like the Boogeyman. I love the Boogeyman.
Right.
Yeah.
But it just fizzled, okay? But now, like you said, everything is so programmed, so cookie cutter, that they're not developing Undertakers anymore.
Right.
Why do you think that stopped? Why did that stop?
personally, as a fan and as somebody who's looked back on it in the articles I've written through the years, you can with the WWE, the WWF, you can put your finger on the moment. And I don't want to sound like I'm blaming one person, but when Triple H became the main event heel, that's when the beginning of the end started, because you began to realize, okay, what I'm watching is not the Attitude Era. This isn't Rock Austin. This isn't, Austin, Shawn Michaels, early DX. You bring Triple H in, you push him, he's on TV 3-4 segments a show. And more importantly than that, everybody who was built up, Kane, Jericho, Scott Steiner, Test, Rob Van Dam, any of these guys you bring in, even Goldberg, every single one of them lost the feud. Fans,
you know what happened, Ian? You know what happened? And here's what happened. And Randy, this is as simple as it's going to get. It became the McMahon family show.
Exactly.
That's what happened.
And you had the biggest thing is
it became the McMahon family show. Triple H was the golden goose. They put him over to nauseum. How would it have killed anybody then? Would it have killed anyone to put Sting over in his one and only WrestleMania match?
Oh, yeah.
They have to shit on the guy.
Sting losing that match made absolutely no sense in the storyline, because it literally became one last WWF was better than WCW. Ha ha, look.
Yes, you're right.
That's
what happened. That even happened to Randy Hogan. I mean, really. On WCW, why do you think I could keep the Hogan gimmick going?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, you know what, Randy? That's a good point. Tell everybody that story.
Well, the story is everybody else up there was either a one-off, as the jobbers go, or enhancement, whatever you want to call us.
Yeah.
But I was one of the few that never had to change my name.
Exactly.
Now, why did I not have? I didn't have the red and yellow. I didn't have that Hogan gimmick going on. I had the Randy Hogan name that was given to me going on. Yeah. I always had the mustache long before I started wrestling and everything else. I just looked like this other guy. Okay. So as the wars are going on, I believe and I heard that WCW says, well, they got Hogan, so we're going to show how superior we are. We're going to show you what we can do to a Hogan. So that's why it was good for me, because I was on TV every week and I was making some change, that was good.
And it wasn't, correct me if I'm wrong here, Randy, watching your matches when I was a kid, it wasn't just losing. It was Vader with 4 Vader bombs. It was Sting. You got demolished. They went out of their way to beat you up every week, not just a loss match.
But they paid him, so shut up.
Pin me, pay me, baby. Pin me, pay me.
Pay me, exactly.
I'm proud of it all, but again, that's just a classic example, And it's funny now when they need a boost, when the Fed needs a boost for something, they're not bringing any new talents in that, like you said, they're not developing. They bring back the Taker, they bring back Kane, they'll bring back HBK or Ric Flair for some cameos. They're bringing the old names back.
They bring all of these guys back that are now in their 50s and 60s, and
if they're still that popular. Yeah, if they're still that popular, why don't they learn by that and treat somebody else who can be around for 20 years?
Because if they're as smart as the MAN Sebastiano, and they are as in tune and keen to the history of the business as Dan the Man, and they should. By the way, I'm touting Dan the Man for a permanent position on the board of directors of WWE. So if anyone is listening to this show from the Fed, I got a guy here that will single-handedly, if given the opportunity, turn that company around within a week's time. Dan the Man Sebastiano. He's the smartest man in the room. He is a historian par excellence, unlike anyone. Go ahead, Dan. You tell them how great you are.
I mean, you give me complete veto power and control at, say, SummerSlam, and I'd have you a 4 rating by WrestleMania.
There you go.
Damn, I like that. Angelo, you can be his assistant. You could be his assistant, and you could bring in Jimmy Cornette or something for humor.
I mean, I was about to say, if we're gonna have Angelo, I guess we need to bring WWF Radio back, or what was it called? Radio WWF.
I'll call my buddy Vince Russo.
Yes.
Do they still have the 900 number phone lines? We need somebody to man the WWF phone line.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? Now, Randy, were you there when Mean Gene had the phone line?
I was not there then, no, but I do remember the phone line.
But now, see, just as something as quirky as you're laughing, but you know where I'm going with this.
Oh no, absolutely.
As something as quirky as the 900 phone line, I will bet you dollars to donuts. If you give that 900 number out, you don't even have to tell anybody what it is. Just flash that number on the bottom of the screen. Just do that. Guess what? You're going to light the boards up.
Yep.
You're going to make a shit ton of money, and you won't have to advertise it because the fans will do it for you. I promise you.
Yep.
They'll do it for you.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing. That's a perfect point there, Angelo, is word of mouth. You know, Randy talked about social media kind of being the downfall. That's another one. Is when I was a kid, or when you guys were younger, and you watch, you go watch Bruno and you go watch these matches. What is the first thing you do? You're at the water cooler the next day. Oh my God, I was at the Garden. I saw this, that, and the other.
Talking about it.
I watch a pay-per-view or I watch a wrestling show, and the first thing I'm writing is how terrible it was, and I can't believe anybody still watches this crap. And even the fans, the few people who tune in, know what they're watching is garbage, but they're tuning in for one reason or another.
I'm going to prove your point to you. Dan the Man, I am going to prove your point to you by saying this simple question. I'm going to ask you one simple question that'll prove your point. When was the last time on this show that you and I actually discussed a wrestling match? April, maybe. Maybe.
Oh.
Yeah, you just answered my question.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Didn't I ask didn't I ask Cowboy about his tag match with the midgets? Wasn't that that was? But that's not really talking about the match.
But that's
that was
a match that happened 35 years ago.
Oh yeah, no, I honestly, since I took over after Jeff passed, I don't think we've talked about a modern match in a form of analysis. Everything we've done has been, did you see this crap? Did you hear about this crap? Did you hear about this angle?
That's my point. You just answered my question. Yes. Yeah. There you go.
Never.
Randy, that's the point I'm trying to make. That we have literally not discussed a single modern wrestling match since Dan the Man has joined the show.
Because there's nothing memorable anymore.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yep.
It's not wrong, but nothing memorable.
I want to throw the phone lines open, so if anyone's out there wants to call in, and maybe we can get my friend Alan Taylor to call in. Alan, if you're watching this or you're listening, call in, because you got some opinions on this shit. I know that. But anyway, if we're waiting for someone to call in, let's talk about where we go. Randy, you've seen, just because of your age, and because you're slightly older than I am, but you've been around a little longer than I, and you've seen this evolutionary process, like this roller coaster, take dips, and spike up and take dips again. And it always ends up evening out at some point. This feels different, though, Randy. It feels different. It doesn't feel like that ebb and flow. It feels like it's a roller coaster on the down, and it's going down. I don't see anything on the upswing here, because it just really seems bad.
Well, it seemed like at first NWA was coming back, the NWA Power and all that, with Nick Aldis and people, and they were going to go more old school style, more studio wrestling style.
Yeah.
That fizzled. AEW come in, no, we're going to go back. We're going to get back to wrestling again and that.
Yeah.
That fizzled.
Yeah.
I believe that your fans, whether they be new fans, old fans, whatever, they want to believe again. They want to be so bad. They want to be invested. That's why they still look at this crap, myself included, just waiting for that one moment, that one person that's going to show up and say, wow, I like this. I can't wait to see what happens next week.
Right.
It don't happen.
You just said something so important. AEW. I had such hopes for AEW. NWA Power. I had such hopes for NWA Power. But AEW particularly, what they did, and I wish to God they didn't do it, and I hope they don't do it. I hope they don't do it, but they did it. Here's what they did. They tried to compete with WWE. That was the biggest, pardon my language, guys, the biggest fucking mistake they could have made. Because what they did was they ushered in their death knell.
Right.
Don't compete with NXT. Don't compete with Vince. Just go on the air. You bought your TV time. You own it. Do your show on your terms. Don't worry about what they're doing at the Performance Center in Florida. Who cares? Who cares?
Well, but who's setting the direction? Who's setting the direction at AEW? Look at the talent they got there. Cody being the youngest, okay, but you got Dustin there. You got Tully Blanchard. You got Arn Anderson. These guys should be able to bring that old flair storytelling back. But either they're not listening to them, or who has the control over the direction?
I'm going to tell you what it is, Randy. And when I say it, you'll understand. It's the wrestling mentality. It's that need to be, and you know this, it's that need to be better than the next guy. Instead of just going out there and performing the best way you, I'll use music. Okay, you're a musician. I'll use music, for example. You're the opening act for ZZ Top, okay? You go out there, nobody knows who you are. You're doing your set, you're doing your show. You're on the same card as a big band, but you're performing your music the way you do it, right?
Yeah.
That crowd that you're performing for, they didn't come there to see you, but because you're there, you've got the chance to win them over. You've got the chance to make new fans now. AEW was in that position, and they blew it by trying to compete. Well, if you're on stage opening up for ZZ Top, the last thing you want to do is play ZZ Top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you understand my point?
Absolutely.
There you go. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, what killed AEW's mantra there was when they came out, both the Rhodes brothers and Khan and everybody, they said it's going to be sports-based wrestling. It's going to be old school. It's going to be real. Win losses are going to matter. We're going to keep stats. It's going to be just like you expected. And just last week they had a musical number. You had a match. No bullshit, like a legit song and dance Broadway show number as part of their storyline. You have characters that are just off from what you're going for. You have stupid gimmicks. You've got the Dark Order. You've got this stuff that just doesn't make sense. You say you want to be sports-based wrestling, and you come out and you're either WWE light or you're a glorified indie show.
Yeah.
Because what you have is you have Omega, the Young Bucks, Cody Rhodes, Jericho. These guys are not just talent. They're on contract VPs of the company. So the people that want to do all this crap are the ones running the show.
And that's the point I was trying to make with Randy earlier, talking about, what are we learning from them? The point you just said it, we're not learning anything. Here's the thing, though. Here's the biggest thing, and Randy, I want to throw this over to you. Dan just, he spouted all of these things that AEW told us that they were going to do. Wins and losses are going to, wins and losses matter. They're going to keep stats. They're going to. The one thing that they started to do, Dan and Randy, they used to do the after-match scrum.
Right.
Okay, that's gone now. That gave it a sports feel. It gave it a legit sports feel. The after-show scrum, like, Tony Khan, the old coach, coming out with the tie down and, here's one for the team boys, whatever.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But it had a legit, that's the point I'm trying to make. It had a legitimacy to it. Now, like Dan just pointed out, song and dance numbers, what the hell? I mean, come on. Randy, smarten AEW up. What are they, from the voice of experience, you've been around, tell these young punks what they need to do. Smarten them up.
If it's as simple as if they would go back to when they were starting and the things that they promised us, wrestling based, legitimate, studio style type thing. No, not many gimmicks or goofy storylines or no Vince stuff going on. Bottom line is they lied to us, just like Vince lies to us.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Why are they any better than Vince? Now they're on the same level as Vince. Vince has got more money that he's going to put into it. Khan's got a bunch of bucks, but eventually he's going to say, just like Ted Turner, I put enough into this. I think it's maybe time to wind it down. And that same thing, Vince is going to own
Randy,
the world again.
That's a real good point, Randy. Let me ask you a question. Because really, for all intents and purposes, although Tony Khan is a young, successful businessman and has a considerable wealth load himself, the guy that really is financing this is his father, Shahid Khan, who is like one of the, I think, third or fourth wealthiest man in the world. If I'm right, Dan, am I right about that? He's what?
I'm not sure. I know he's up there, but I don't know how high specifically.
I know he's one of the richest men in the world, like legit. So, like, money is no problem for this guy.
Right.
But the question is, and maybe you could both answer it, is like, at what point do you say, I'm going to cut my losses now?
Exactly.
Like, how much money do you throw good after bad,
He didn't get all that money by making bad decisions.
Right.
And if he figures out that the millions that he's put into this already down the road is a bad decision, he's going to cut his losses. Or I would imagine that he's smart enough to do that.
You could end up with the same situation WCW was in. Once Turner knew he was losing money, but he was having fun. Once the fun was gone and the businessmen took over, the first thing they did was tell WCW, we're done. No TV, no nothing. We're not going to just throw money at a product because we feel like it. Mm-hmm. At some point, the cons, maybe they decide, I don't know how AEW is doing financially, but maybe they decide one thing or the other. I mean, that's, for better or worse, that's one thing McMahon has done well, is even the lowest ratings his company has ever had, and they just had their most profitable quarter ever because they've found a way to make money that doesn't require putting on good wrestling matches.
But how is that?
Yeah.
How is that? And AEW the same way. If they don't have any revenue coming in from the stadiums or the $60 pay-per-views like they used to have, once every couple of months, where's the money coming from? And they got $1 million in payroll, I don't understand.
The WWE's smart in the sense that the network has a huge archive. They've released streaming numbers in the past that have shown an overwhelming majority of what's watched on the network is prior to 1995. So I mean, you have that, the network revenue. You've got all your ad sharing, because between Raw, SmackDown, and NXT, that's 7 hours of television. Even with low ratings, you're still making good money selling commercials. And God, anybody that's watched wrestling knows there's enough commercial breaks
Dan,
nowadays.
that's a real good point, Dan. You and I actually, I think, I think it might have been 3 shows back, actually talked about the effect of advertising revenue on the product. Do advertise, and Randy, I want your insight and your opinion on this as well as you, Dan. Do advertisers have, how do I want to say this? I'll put it in 2 parts. Do they have too much say so over the product, and B, do they have too much stake in the product?
On both fronts, yes, they have too much control. The reason that the WWE went PG versus PG-13 is because of the ad money. And the other thing is they have stake. I mean, you watch the program now, and it's, the Sprite, Snickers, M&M, Pennzoil WrestleMania event instead of just being, whatever. So, like, these companies, they say, look, we're going to give you X number of dollars. And we don't, really, at that point, we don't care if the ratings are good. We just need 60 mentions of Pennzoil. So what happens? You watch a match or you watch a show, and it's like, man, he just beat him like he's gonna want some Sprite after this match, and Sprite they'll mention the name Sprite 30 times in an hour.
Yeah.
And it becomes a commercial. Yes, I think you're right. And Randy, correct me if I'm wrong. The sponsors have too much control and too much say over the final product.
I could not even imagine arguing with the smartest wrestling man on the planet like you, Dan. I totally agree with every word you said. I got nothing to add.
You see that, Dan? When you let somebody like me put you over, you see that?
You could be AEW next world champion.
He's going to wear the belt.
Him and David Arquette.
And, he's the next Vince Russo. God forbid.
Oh, God. Don't put that evil on me.
Well, look, you like Vince. He's a nice guy. He's been here a couple times. He's coming back, by the way, too. But anyway, here's the thing, though. It's interesting. It really is. Back in the day, and Randy, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Back in the day, you didn't have the level of sponsors, but you had your local markets that sponsored wrestling shows on television. Uncle Jack's Pancake House down the street. Okay, or the local franchise of Friendly's Ice Cream or something like that, right?
Oh man, I miss Friendly's.
And you had the local market sponsored the show, which in turn did what? Brought you local wrestling to your high school, to your civic auditorium, to your VFW hall, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
That's where the revenue was generated. Now, all of that's gone, and they've got this huge corporate money prostituting everything it touches.
Yeah.
And there's nothing left to invest in, Randy, to use your term, to invest in something. There's nothing to wrap your head around or throw your heart into. And I think Dan is right about that there's way too much big money influence. I think it has, I'll use the word again, it's prostituted the business. And the only way that wrestling, I think, is going to save itself is to go back to a simpler, more, how do I want to say this? A more basic approach to wrestling. That just is a simple, basic approach like it used to be.
Right.
Storylines, good guy versus bad guy.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing, the basics. I watch an entire angle, 2-3, let's say something that actually lasts 2-3 months. By the end of it, I can't tell you who the face is. I can't tell you who the heel is. I can't tell you why you're fighting, why I should care. And without those 4 things, you have nothing for the crowd to get invested in.
And as a way of bringing the conversation back full circle, that's exactly what Randy started the conversation off with.
Mm-hmm.
He's got nothing to, Randy and I are just a few years apart, but we've been wrestling fans since we were this big,
Right.
And I'm not much taller than that now. But the point is, we've been fans a long time. We saw the evolution of wrestling. I'm not happy with the direction it's taken. I still, and Randy, I'll throw this over to you to get your insight, but I still think that there might be a window of hope. I'm hoping that there's this little crack that we could punch through and kind of like see daylight again. Because right now it looks like the windows are closing rapidly on the future of wrestling. What, in your opinion, what do we need to do to bust through that proverbial crack in the armor?
I don't think with what we have out there right now, I'm not sure mentally the hierarchy has the ability to push through. I think it's going to take an outside, a fourth force to come in that has been listening to the fans all these years about getting back to what you and I like, and we like to think that there's a lot more people out there.
Yeah.
People that are going to invest in it. Just to touch back when you talked about the advertising and the money and all this, it all goes down to greed. Not only on the Fed, but the advertisers, everybody. You got the wrestlers making $4-5 million just wrestling a year. I heard an interview with your buddy Ricky Morton just a couple of days ago. Said he never made more than $150,000 in his life wrestling.
Yeah,
and he said you got guys that are making that in 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
That was his best year.
We touched on that.
It's greed.
We touched on that a couple episodes ago, Angelo, where you hear, especially the WWE, they were offering contracts upwards of $750,000 guaranteed just to keep somebody in the locker room. Right.
Downside guarantee.
Just to keep somebody in the locker room. You're not going to wrestle. You're not going to win a title. We're going to give you $750,000 just to be here, just to make sure you don't wrestle anywhere else.
Yeah. A downs. Can you imagine that, Randy? Could you imagine being under WCW contract on a downside of 750?
No. If you give me a downside of 750, I'd wrestle New Jack every day. I mean,
you give me a downside of 50 and I'd wrestle New.
Damn.
But that fourth entity is going to have to come in and save us all. They're going to have to be Tony Khan, deep pockets. They have lots of money. They're going to have the mentality that what is missing, what is new. Not only do we need a new superstar, but we need a new environment, and somebody's going to have to create that. And the big three right now, I don't see happening.
Well, you know what? That's a really good point. The big three. There are two more, you guys. Two more that we didn't even bring up tonight because largely, I think the fate of one of them has already been determined, but the other one, they show a little promise, and I want to throw it to my co-host, the smartest man in the room, MLW, and don't ask me how they're doing it, but they're still hanging onto a thread. Ring of Honor.
Yeah.
These two groups are still out there. They're still functioning promotions, but Ring of Honor, I think it's pretty well been determined that they don't have much gas left in the tank.
Well, I think what saved Ring of Honor was when they were purchased by Sinclair Broadcasting. That gave them.
Let's talk about that. Is that a salvation, or again, like we just talked about, a big company? And their deep pockets, like think about what Sinclair is. Sinclair's a broadcasting company.
Right.
Are they really going to invest their heart and soul into a wrestling company, or is it just another TV product for them?
Well, I mean, you look at, it's actually funny you mentioned that because Ring of Honor, prior to the purchase of Sinclair Broadcasting, the main creative voice in Ring of Honor was Jim Cornette, and his name came up earlier. And you watched what happened when Sinclair came in and some of the bigwigs they brought. He ended up leaving, and the product kind of shifted away from the old school territory wrestling to the indie fed we think of now, with the flippy shit and the high spots and those guys. And don't get me wrong, Ring of Honor has bred some serious talent in the last 10, 15 years. But you had, for as little as I like the guy, you had Meltzer and PWI giving Cornette Booker of the Year during that time period because of what Ring of Honor was doing that was so different. Now it's NXT Light. NXT and Ring of Honor are interchangeable. And that would not have happened without Sinclair. But the money that Sinclair brought in is the only reason they're still around.
Don't you think,
Randy?
Whoever...
I was going to ask you, why don't you take the MLW approach, or do they show any promise of breaking through? Groups like MLW, Evolve, Revolution Pro Wrestling, groups like there's a lot of fairly decent sized indies out there who have television, and unless you're a wrestling fan, you're not watching them, but somebody's watching these guys because they're on TV.
Well, I think a lot of it though is still, it's not national. Whoever's going to break through has got to have a major network visibility, appearance to them.
Yep.
Okay? I have never seen Evolve or MLW. They're not on TV down here. I've got cable and a couple little things, They're not on any of my channels. I can't see them. So how are they going to be a force to be reckoned with, Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And
they need a major presence.
And that's the problem, Dan. That almighty television exposure. We heard, Jimmy Snooker's wife, Carol, used to say, Jimmy called it the TV Wonderland, brother. TV Wonderland, brother. And that's what it was. It was like with people, and this it ties into that because people knew who Jimmy was worldwide, and Jimmy didn't realize that he was being seen all over the world. He just knew that he was making a shit ton of money. He just thought it was coming from Vince's pocket. He didn't realize it was coming from Vince's television.
Right.
But, I'll tell you what, guys. This is, that's a fast hour and a half, boy. But as we close out this episode, this conversation is just the tip of the iceberg, you guys. I mean, it really is.
Right.
We could have like a mini series on this, and you realize that we haven't discussed the same thing twice tonight, which is remarkable. As we close out this episode, we will be back on Thursday. Next Thursday, we will not be here on Tuesday. It is Election Day. I encourage everyone to go out and vote. I don't care who you vote for. Write somebody in, pull your lever. I don't care. Again, I don't care if you vote for the dog catcher, the mailman, or the guy that hangs out at the 7-Eleven. Doesn't make any difference to me. Just vote for somebody.
I'm voting for Dan.
Yeah, right. I'm voting for Dan's hats. The man of many hats. Here goes. There it is. I love that hat. The color reminds me of an old-fashioned 12-year-old newsboy on the corner, with
the nickname for this style is Newsy. That's what they call this cut of hat.
And that always reminded me of that because it's like the kid on the corner with the stack of papers in that big overstuffed bag.
Yeah. Extra. Read all about it.
Read all about it. Titanic sank,
Yeah.
But as we close out, we want to invite everyone to join us a week from today, and our guest will be Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster himself.
My favorite.
Will be here, And I've got some surprises that Dan doesn't even know about yet because I haven't gotten to talk to him about it. So we'll save that for our private conversation.
Sounds good.
In the meantime, we will continue to wrestle with the future. Be good to everybody. Be good to each other. And, and again, say a prayer for our country because we got an election coming up that God help us all. It's going to be crazy. I know I will vote. I'm going to do it. I didn't think I was going to, but I'm going to actually vote this year. Be the first time since Jimmy Carter that I've cast a vote. That's true, too. I haven't voted since Jimmy Carter. Yeah. So on behalf of Dan the Man, the smartest guy in the room, the happy haberdasher, the what else are you, Dan? You're the smartest guy in the room, the happy haberdasher. You're the poor man's Penn and Teller. No.
I'll take it. Any comparison to those two.
And for Randy Hogan, the world's foremost Hulk Hogan lookalike. In person. Actually, no, we already established Hulk looks like Randy, so there you go.
Thanks for clarifying that, brother.
Yep, exactly. Brother. Boy, brother. But we'll be back 1 week from today. Take care of everybody. Happy wrestling. We'll see you next time as we wrestle with the future. Bye-bye.